what is your hope for this book? That women obviously learn more about the women in the book, but that get kind of started to say, okay, I want to learn more. There are probably a lot more women out there that I didn't know.
Well,
What is your hope?
well, I hope that not just women read this book because it's a book about history, and I've read dozens of books about great men with no problem because I'm just interested in history. So I don't
Sure.
think this is a book for girls. It's a book for people who are interested in creativity and amazing things in this world. But I don't know. Like, look, this isn't an original idea to write about women who have diminished, but I hope that it just makes more people write these books until we get to the point where they're just history books and not about something that's been kept from us by the writers of history.
Thanks for watching Hot Flashes and Cool Topics podcast. Be sure to subscribe and ring that bell to catch all of our conversations. Now, on to the show.
Welcome back to Hot Flashes and Cool Topics. Today, we are speaking with Lori Zimmer and Maria Krasinski. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Thank you for having us.
Happy to be here.
Bridgett and I have really enjoyed reading this book, and not just reading the content, but also seeing the beautiful illustrations that you did, Maria. You both are so talented. And the book is called I'm Not Your Muse, 31 Profiles of Women in the Creative Arts Whose Contributions Have Been Erased from History or Rewritten. And I like the fact that you mentioned that it might be that they're rewritten and not accurate. I'm going to ask you, Lori, first. How did you come up with the idea for this book?
It kind of just revealed itself to me. Maria and I, this is our third book together, and I do a lot of research for every book and just in general. And I kept coming across these interesting ladies that I had heard of, or maybe not at all, and would keep them in a little like separate Excel file because that's everything in my life comes down to an Excel file. It's pretty dorky and outdated, but that's just, I am who I am. And when the list was getting really lengthy, and so I was just like, yes, this is the next topic. It was approaching 100 women, and I just started delving in and finding out what I could, and finally it was difficult, but narrowed it down to the 31, which, as you can imagine, was no easy task.
Right. And, so many of these women, I went through your list and I listened to your book and I said, how many of these women had I heard of before? Three. I had heard of three women.
Really?
That is it.
Out of 31.
Out of 30, Alice B. Toklas, you all getting the brownie or the fudge, the Heshich fudge. And we heard of that. I had heard of Loie Fuller. I heard that on the History Chicks podcast. So I'd heard about her. And then Martha Gellhorn, Hemingway. And
good.
That was the only three. I could not believe out of this whole list, I had only heard of three of these really incredible women. And then Maria, these women, it had to be hard to find information on them. I did last night. I sat down and I Googled every one of them to see what they look like. But how was that to get artwork to illustrate for that?
Yeah, there was quite a range. Some are more known than others, like you said, Martha Gellhorn or, Alice B. Toklas, although often she was beside Gertrude Stein when you would find pictures. So for some, there are quite a few historical images. So that was obviously great reference material to work with. Others, especially some of the ones who were, sort of the 100 years ago, not 50 or 60 years ago, or even more, there might be a painting of them, or maybe one very formal, old style kind of photograph. So with them, I kind of used that as a reference, but then I looked up a lot of, what was the fashion of the era, or I tried to incorporate the artwork that they did, or, if they were a writer or a dancer, other things from the medium that they worked in to create kind of a collage of their life experience.
So you say you have 100 women in your Excel sheet, and you narrow it down to 31. How did you go about picking which women would be in the book?
Well, I had a couple of different, well, not obviously. I tried to make sure to make it as diverse as possible because, I need to use my voice to promote women in other countries and other ethnicities and other fields and whatnot. But a lot of it came down to the availability of information to me. And now I do my research process is really multi-layered. I start out with the internet, but the internet you can never trust. So the internet I use to give ideas, right? And from there, I go to rare book rooms and archives and blah, 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 blah. And a lot of the women had maybe no mentions, in the New York Times archive, or there was maybe a book written about them 50 years ago. So for those women, I just had to give up the quest for this particular book, because if I were writing, just a regular biography, I would travel and I would go further. But with 31 women, I had to give myself some limitation. And I know that there's some other really fabulous books out there about female artists in different, there's some that are just general, some that are focused on New York City, and those are wonderful. But I wanted to include some other women that were in the creative arts as well, because although I kind of have personally evolved around the art world, I'm not an artist. And I think that what I do is just as important as an artist, and that the same for these women. So I tried to go with writing and music and performance and architecture and design, as well as artists.
Yeah, I that was something I really enjoyed about your book, is that it was so diverse, that we got to hear about so many different women that were from all over. And another thing that stood out to me, which it's not surprising, is the number of men that took credit for the work of so many women. How were you able to really, you just talked about how you researched, but how could you find out how, they had to really dig to get their real story out. I can't even talk. I'm so mad about it. I can't even talk. So.
Yeah. Aside from white knuckling through this research for a year and a half, there has been the reveal for a lot of the stories was correspondence has been found in archives by other more meticulous researchers than I am, who within the last 20 years have found a lot of truths out there. But it does seem to be consistently true with most of these women. I will say one of the women that I cover is Clara Driscoll, who turns out, because of correspondence revealed that someone found in 2009, she designed a lot of the Tiffany lamps that we know today. But I will defend Louis Comfort Tiffany for a hot second, because that was just his practice. He didn't give credit to the men in his designers in his business either. So this wasn't necessarily him trying to, he greatly respected Clara Driscoll and he paid her as such. So this wasn't as devious as the other stories.
Yes, but didn't Tiffany have a rule that said if you're a married woman or an engaged woman, you could not work there? I don't know how much credit I want to give Tiffany.
I don't want to give him credit, but some of the other stories, the men were actively trying to erase these women's names. And I know it's not okay. This isn't that, but I do not want to throw every man's name in that same devious kind of, action. But you're totally right about that. And that's why she worked there and retired and worked and retired 3 times. First time because she was engaged, so therefore she couldn't work there. Then when that marriage didn't work out, she stopped when she finally got married. Then he died. Then she retired again when she got married for the second time. So you're not completely wrong on that.
Lori and I would stay in contact, while in the process of making the book. And it was every day, it's oh my God, guess what I found today? You're not going to believe this. There's just this constant state of being seriously?
Yeah.
Well, Maria, as an I'm sorry. I was just going to add, as an artist, how do you, I know there's ways, but what do you do to protect yourself? Has anything like that ever happened to you where someone takes credit for something that you did?
Luckily not, at least not that I know of at this point. I've certainly seen it happen or kind of be diminished, and try and do your best to champion or really trumpet the person who's really behind the magic making. But thus far I have escaped that.
Well, that's good to know. I think one of the women that really represented what we're talking about with men taking credit was Alice Guy Blache. Is that her last
Alice
name?
Guy Blaché.
Okay.
Oh, the
You
movie.
said it much better than
You
I
gotta do a
did.
little. You gotta do your little French.
Blache.
Blaché.
Blache. Alice Guy Blache. But she was the mother of the movies. And I thought it was so interesting that she went to see this first short little film, and all the men were talking about how the cameras were. And
Yeah.
she's like, but this content is boring. This boring content is not, no one, and the men are like, no, I have a better camera than you. And
Mhm.
in creating that, she then became head of productions for a film company and then created her own studio. And then men started taking credit for her films. It was her husband, correct? That started taking credit.
It was everyone. So initially, yes, and yes. Initially, so when she was present the day that the Lumiere brothers shared their demonstration film. This is what they were called. They were just supposed to demonstrate how the cameras worked, and I believe it was just workers walking out of their factory. And she was with her boss. She worked at Gaumont Films, and she was just a secretary at the time, Léon Gaumont. And she left there asking him if she could borrow some of the equipment because she said, you know what, this would be a great way to tell stories. And her first film, a rendition of her first film, is that you can look at most of them on YouTube. It's called The Cabbage Fairy. And it kind of like, it must be where Cabbage Patch Kids got their idea from, because it's an actress who's a friend of hers walking through a cardboard field and where babies are growing in the middle of cabbage leaves. And for a while, like after she left, and she and her husband, whose last name was Blaché, decided to start their own company, and they ended up moving to Flushing, Queens, which was this pre-Hollywood, then to Fort Lee, New Jersey, which was the pre-Hollywood Hollywood, which I think is kind of crazy. Léon Gaumont tried to take credit for all the films that she made under his company, because he gave her infinite money. She had a stable of actors and everything. And then once she left him, her husband tried to take credit for all of the films that they made when they were in business together. And you can find videos on YouTube as well of her as an older woman, like still talking to the media, still trying to say, these are my films. And I think she recovered maybe 125 of them. But like, if it weren't for her, like, who knows when we would have developed narrative film? Like, can you imagine movies just being for a demonstration, right? Like
Right.
how obsessed we are with movies. And she's not even in, I remember taking a history of film class, and she was not even mentioned. Like, they didn't start to talk about women until like the 20s or 30s, and it's incredible.
Yeah, when I was reading that part, I kept thinking, Colleen, back when we started podcasting, and when we went to these podcasting conferences, and the men were more concerned with, this is my microphone and this is my camera. And the women were like, they were wanting to hear just content stories, how to get a message across. It just reminded me of that. But
Wow.
yeah, it really did.
Parallel.
It
Still
really
happening
did.
today.
Yeah. And Belle Costa da Costa. I'm not saying this right.
We
Belle
are
da
butchering
Costa
these
Green.
names. We
I
apologize.
am. And that was an
both are.
easy one. Belle da Costa Green. That
Yeah.
was one that really stood out to me because JP Morgan really backed her. So that was a different take on the men. Like, he really pushed her forward. What were your all's thoughts on that one? Like, how that happened, how that came about?
It is kind of, it was a rarity, the implicit like trust. And also, so basically JP Morgan, when he was building his private library, as the rich men did back then, that was one of the things you did to show off your wealth. And he hired her. His nephew found her. She was working at the Princeton Library, I believe. And he really like let her go out and go to these auctions around the world with his link to his bank account. And it is kind of rare and wild, but I'm glad that he did it, because she really shaped what it meant to collect in the Gilded Age. She made sure that the collection was really well-rounded with, aside from like volumes and illuminated manuscripts, she had like Renaissance drawings and things that she thought were important to history. And her whole goal was to turn his library into a teaching and library and a scholar library, which also like wasn't precedent for the time. It was you would hoard them. And even it just shows his implicit trust in her, because he died in 1913 and he left, instructions with his son to appoint her as head of like the library foundation. So he just like completely, not every person was sexist in every single facet of their lives, although I'm not sure I would say JP Morgan was a kind or great man.
It was really shocking though. I was like, wow. And it was so interesting. Colleen and I are in a different book club, and we were that night. Oh, here comes her water.
Thank you.
Adorable. Well,
thank you, Thing. Thank you, Thing. We were talking that night, and they were suggesting books for the next, and she came up, and I had just heard of her that day. And is it the
Personal Library?
Yes, the personal.
It's a great book. It's a great book. Also, she's finally that book was a great book and brought attention to her. And also, the Morgan Library itself, I believe it just closed in May, did a huge exhibition on her finally.
Oh, wow.
It was great.
Because one of the rooms is her office, and it was pretty thorough, right, Maria?
Well,
Yeah.
I think another thing about the book is that the artwork that you do so beautifully, Maria, really almost speaks as loudly as the stories. How did you go about choosing what to include for each picture, each piece of art for each woman?
Well, from the beginning, I knew wanted them all to have a portrait. Often they're the sitting as the kind of passive muse. For many of the women, they were the subject of another man's artwork, and so here's just sort of they're the subject again, but they're looking right at you. Have a little bit more agency, maybe a little sassy look on their face. So just kind of creating that as a consistent through line, and then giving each of them kind of a fancy frame. Tried to find some things that were maybe, again, of that era, like maybe like an Art Deco style for someone from like the early 1900s. And then all of the background, almost all of the background, some of them are a little bit plain, but again, they're referencing elements of the story. So, Lori would finish a chapter, have a draft, and so I had been, kind of researching the portrait side of it and the clothing and how they would look, but then what could we pull in from the text to include in the portrait? Because like our previous two books, there are no photographs. These are art books, art history books, but there's no photographs, which
that's on purpose.
It's on purpose. People are like, great book, but there's no pictures. How is this an art book? But for us, it's really about your imagination, and it's not just here's a photo that you may have seen already 20 times before or that's printed here and there. It's meant to kind of let you take what you will from the text, combine with the illustration, and sort of imagine what that world would be and immerse yourself in it a bit. It's also just fun. Like the fun part of being the illustrator is you get to put a lot of Easter eggs in there. So it's like, if you know, like everything that's there is there for a reason, even if it looks just purely decorative.
It's so cool too that I like at the end of the chapters that you have just the little bitty illustration too of
a little accent.
That's about. And I thought
like the cabbage, like Alice
the cabbage patch. Yeah,
I really wanted to draw a cabbage.
Yeah, I think I do. I think that's got to be so fun to be able to do that, just to create. Because I am so bad. Like my family I have such good artists in my family, and
you are not one of them, Bridgett.
I am not one of them.
You have someone to appreciate the art.
I do
compliment each other.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That's and it makes it different. It makes the book stand out, and a great coffee table addition to anybody's home, because like you said, sometimes it's nice to create your own imagination of what they would actually kind of really look like or be doing in your head. And a lot of these women I noticed live very long lives. Not all of them. but a lot of them live very long lives. And I wonder if having this purpose, this artistic nature helped with their longevity, because they do say having that creative outlet can help. So that's kind of interesting.
Totally agree.
Absolutely.
I never thought about that, but you're so
Yeah.
right. Like a
Because I
higher
was
purpose.
looking at because you put in when they were born. I'm like, these women back in the day had really long, some of them till 1990s and longer, which is
Yeah.
And some
amazing.
of them were really destitute and they still lived, like still creating art until the very end, So you're right, that purpose is drive. Definitely.
Absolutely. And with the portraits too, I want, especially for these artists who've been creating their whole lives, you can find the pictures when they're, in their 20s and this and that, but I really wanted to have a variety of ages represented. Like, okay, well, here are, is Leonora Carrington when she's in her 70s, not when she's 25 in Paris, just to have that representation more, because they were working and productive and thriving. And I mean, they say that now, like a key to longevity is staying curious, staying active,
I
surprising
really
yourself.
love that too. So like when Maria is making these drawings, I see them sometimes, but I didn't know that she was doing all different ages, and I absolutely like loved that. That was a surprise to me, especially like as a woman who is in middle age. Like I'm like, yeah, well, I'm still doing stuff, so
Mhm.
I should be represented in that way as well. So I loved that. Was a surprise to me, and I loved it.
Well,
It's
that's why sometimes collaborating on projects is
right.
so much more creative, because you're getting
Yeah,
to see the best of both sides. And one of the women that I really thought was a kick butt woman was Martha Gellhorn.
yeah.
And I loved her
Legend.
story. Can you talk about why you picked her and why she was not a muse?
Okay, so Martha Gellhorn was an incredible war correspondent and writer, and she covered every major conflict over, I believe, a 60-year period, just like right until the very end. And the thing that she did wrong in her life, why we don't, well, let me give him one more accolade of how badass she was.
You can say that.
Badass woman.
You could say
Um,
it. She was a badass. She was.
She was.
she was okay. So World War II, remember it? She was a woman, so no press would give her accreditation, and she said, okay, whatever, I don't care, and she snuck onto a hospital ship that was bound for the beaches of Normandy, and she was the only woman right there on the ground on D-Day. She immediately started burying stretchers and just like wrote about what she saw, and she wouldn't take no for an answer. I mean, who is going to hide in the bathroom of a hospital ship to sneak aboard like a war front? Like, as insane as that. But
It's
anyway,
intense war
her
front.
third husband was Hemingway. And so since that moment that they got together, she was forever known as Hemingway's third wife. Her only husband. I'm
Oh, yeah.
sorry. Hemingway's third, I said that wrong. Third wife. And so she kind of gets pushed to the side for his grandeur. And like I feel like Hemingway is like a really stereotype of like how we look at great men. Like we know he's terrible and abusive and an alcoholic and said all these horrible things and treated people this horrible way, but we let his art like wash over us, and we're like, but that's fine because he contributed so much to literature. And I love his books. I do. I do, but I also am a critical thinker that can separate the artist from the art. And so he was very enthralled with Martha. She was a writer at the same time, and I think in part of him wanted the idea of having like a dual, like an equal. And then as soon as he got her, he didn't want that equal anymore. And he was drinking and smoking and hanging out with his friends in their house, and there was a war going on, and she said, I don't think we should be here. I think we should be on a war front. And so she left and did what she felt was her duty. And he sent her a telegram that said, are you a war correspondent or are you a wife in my bed? And that was the end. And then she divorced him. And, like he thought that he could control her and make her not who she was. And
Right. And she's
kudos
the
to
only
her.
one that left him. She's the only one of
Yeah.
his wives.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we did when the book first came out, we did a talk and we were pulling some of those historic images, and I think Lori found the obituaries, the print of his other wives. Almost, I think one of them just said Hemingway's second wife passes.
Yeah.
Doesn't even
No
give her
name.
a name.
Doesn't even give her a
But
name.
Martha Gellhorn, she's the only one where she had her own headline uninterrupted with his name. It
War
was pretty sweet.
correspondent.
War
Yeah.
Wow.
correspondent.
Awesome.
Still
Awesome.
came
But she's
kind of
like,
high in the article, but
Wow. But then you've got the other art. You've talked about Picasso. And I've got my list of all the names. I don't even
yes.
use Excel. I use LegalPad. But I have, and I'm going through my names and I feel horrible because I'm sitting here saying how awful, and I'm looking for the name of the woman that he treated so terribly.
Fernand Olivier.
Fernanda. Okay.
You knew
So
that, Bridgett. It was on the tip of your tongue, of course.
it's like I feel awful because the purpose of this book is to remember these women. And I'm like, which one was the one that was with Picasso? But I do know her story. But that one too, just how he just held so much power over her that she had to wait. She was destitute as
She
well.
was absolutely destitute while he was like, I can't even remember the statistic. It's in the book, but when he like how much cash he had amassed, it was like $1 million or something, like just laying around. Like
Right.
who does that? But it's not that I don't have empathy for the other women that he was horrible to, but they knew there was, press about it that he was just like this kind of guy. But Fernand was the first. They were really young. They lived in like a squalid, barely lit room in the Bateau Lavoir, which was essentially a shanty in Montmartre where a lot of amazing artists came out of. But like picture starving artists, like we think Picasso and zillions of dollars, but he had to start from someplace. And she was a popular artist model at the time when she met him. I don't think she was very interested in him at first, but apparently had some kind of power. And they were together for quite a while through his blue period, and she was continuing to model. And then when he was done with her, he didn't want her to really have any part of what their life was before. And she was a writer, and she was writing about those times. Like at the turn of the century, Paris was an incredibly interesting time, especially in the Bateau Lavoir. And she was writing memoirs, and he blocked her from publishing them for almost her entire life. And Picasso and Me is now out there. I think it was finally published in the 80s. She started to print it as a serial with a magazine, and he put a kibosh on that. But it's a great book. It's a shame. She was a great memoirist of, like the time. She was around. She was living there. She was working with other artists, but just he had such a need to control that he barely, like, she was living off of nothing.
Yeah.
See it a pattern for a lot of men in the book. And unfortunately, I don't see that a ton has changed in the last 100 years. Hopefully. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of men who consider women their partners in life, but there are still those times where women's ideas are considered their secondary, that it's someone else will take credit. I still think that is happening way too often in society today. Another thing I really liked, Maria, is that I feel like when I looked at the pictures, you could tell their personalities coming through in the art, especially like Ada Bricktop Smith. I feel like I could tell she was before I read the story. Like
my job is done here.
Well, I really felt like her personality came through. How did you create that? Was it through the research that Lori was sending you? Was it from looking at old photos? How important was it for you to kind of create their personality through the photo or through the art? Excuse me.
Oh, huge. And frankly, now that the book's out, I was sort of terrified going into this book because I'm not a portrait artist. Our previous books, I love drawing buildings. I like drawing nature, drawing people. Real people is very stressful. Although I guess this is the case where because they're lesser known, people aren't going to be like, that doesn't look like Frida Kahlo, because maybe they don't know who they are.
Good point.
But with Bricktop, especially, I mean, th she does have a treasure trove of images, and she was a singer, she was a nightclub owner, she was just the hostess with the mostest. So there's a lot of the historical record of her is just this like buoyant, joyful, but also like the boss lady kind of attitude, running nightclubs. So I wanted to kind of give her that cool life of the party, but she holds all the secrets, and so
Yeah,
with
and she'll keep them.
and she will keep all of
Yes,
your
I
secrets.
love that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so like when getting the text from Lori and seeing, what thread she pulled out, I was like, okay, well, this one she lived, she was kind of sassy and she knew it and she owned that. So let's make sure she has that kind of, aura about her. So there were a lot of draw, redraw, trying to get, are they smiling? Are they not? What are they doing to try and capture that?
I love too. One of the other ones I thought was so cool was Clara Rock. What is it? Clara Rockmore, which I'm like,
That was my
Rockmore.
yeah, that was
Yeah.
Yeah,
my
what a
second.
what a
So
great
cool.
name for somebody like that.
I
Oh
Rockmore.
know.
my God, she's so
Incredible.
glamorous too. Did you
Oh,
look up pictures
I
of her?
did. I looked up her video when
And
it
the
said
video, yeah, with her,
when
you
she
can
was
watch her
older.
performance.
Yeah. Oh,
And she lived in 1998, so that was, I mean, in our world, fairly recent. I know anybody who was born over 2000 would say, "Oh, that was a long time ago," but
Yeah, right. We
Back
don't
in the
speak of
last
them.
century.
yeah. I was so fascinated too, the illustration there. And I'm like, I've never heard of this. What is this instrument? And it was incredible. But then again, the man got mad at her. Like what was it? Because she got married? Was
So
that it?
yeah, so I think that Clara Rockmore and Maria Talchief, who is the first American
Prima
word
ballerina.
prima
Yeah.
ballerina. Thank you. I almost said prima donna. I'm like, that is not true. But um, they're kind of similar in a story like this. So Clara Rockmore, she was a violinist as a child, like a prodigy, and then she hurt her arm and she couldn't play in the way that she wanted to anymore. And she was at I love it. Like the story is so glamorous. She was at a party at the Plaza Hotel one night and where she met Leon Theremin, who invented the theremin. And even if you're like, I don't know the theremin, we all know the theremin. It's the first electronic instrument that like Twilight Zone and
Doctor
like the
Who.
or Good
Yeah,
Vibrations,
Beach Boys.
Beach Boys, and
Mhm.
but I think more we think of it as like kitschy horror movies or whatever. And this was an instrument that like it was they were destined to meet, at least for her personally, because she couldn't her hands couldn't do what she wanted them to do anymore. But with the electronic field, she was like a completely intuitive and can play this instrument. And she because of her work or her understanding, her implicit understanding of this invention that she did not invent, she elevated it from like a doodad to like she played in at Carnegie Hall and concert halls and whatever. And the same for Maria Talchief, like Balanchine, her one-time partner, came in and revolutionized ballet for the American audience. And but like she was able to interpret his choreography in such a vigorous way that made it iconic. So both of these women were able to take something, an idea of someone else. It's almost like Balanchine and Terman were their muses, and they elevated this one thought that these two guys had into something that became iconic, right?
Mhm.
But they're not given credit at all.
Yeah. I mean,
It's
that was so incredible. Just that I was like, I've got to know more about this.
And
So I
and
thought that
that
was,
kind of
yeah,
leads me to the
yeah.
question of what is your hope for this book? That women obviously learn more about the women in the book, but that get kind of started to say, okay, I want to learn more. There are probably a lot more women out there that I didn't know.
well,
What is your hope?
Well, I hope that not just women read this book because it's a book about history. And I've read dozens of books about great men with no problem because I'm just interested in history. So I don't
True.
think this is a book for girls. It's a book for people who are interested in creativity and amazing things in this world. But I don't know. Like, look, this isn't an original idea to write about women who have diminished, but I hope that it just makes more people write these books until we get to the point where they're just history books and not about something that's been kept from us by the writers of history. That's sort of my goal. And I also, like, I've said this before, like, these are just little vignettes, and obviously, like, I spent a lot of time researching it, but I don't have as much time as each woman deserves. So I hope that another writer who loves to write biographies reads about one of them and be like, I want to take this to the next level. Because some of these women do have biographies, but they're old and dusty, and I read them so you don't have to, and they're really boring. They're really I mean, they're really old books, but they're just very, very dry. And you should read it with a transatlantic accent while you're reading it. Like, it's just like awful. That was the not fun part of this process.
Oh, yeah.
And, along that, you sort of have, you're like, oh, well, we wrote about Clara Rockmore, or there was already a biography about, Fernand Olivier. Well, you go to any library or bookstore, there's like a whole shelf of Picasso biographies or this,
Yeah.
like, it's not, well, just because it was mentioned once, somebody already told that story. There's so much to find and discover. And yeah, so hopefully it inspires further research, but also I think to appreciate who's making art today and who's in the story and who's not getting the credit they deserve.
Yeah, my question is there someone that you just out of all of these women, which I can't pick a favorite, but there are a lot of really interesting stories. Is there one that each of you just kind of like, okay, that's my friend, that's my person?
So many.
It's hard to pick
I
one.
know.
It's like picking your children. Which
one?
Do you have one, Maria? I mean, mine switches every day.
I know mine switches too. Like I'm really in a Martha Gellhorn moment right now, and part of it is I also work with a youth journalism startup, so like encouraging young voices to go out there and find stories and tell their stories. And so I kind of use her as an example a lot for getting your voice out there. I love Bricktop. I live not far
Yeah.
from Bricktop's Shea Bricktop. So when it's now a organic grocery store. Unfortunately, it did not last. But just walking by, just imagining Bricktop walking these streets. She probably was at this. I know she was at this metro stop because I've seen a photo of her there.
Oh, that gives me chills. That I know exactly the picture you're talking about at Pigalle.
Yeah,
Oh, that
at
gives
Pigalle.
me chills.
And Alice Guy Blaché. We've talked about all of them. They're like,
right?
yeah.
There's so many in this book to enjoy, and we'll make sure to have the link to the book in our show notes.
Thank you.
Lori and Maria, thank you so much for joining us and for
Thanks for
writing
having us.
and illustrating this beautiful book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.